sound of a steam locomotive in the forest, once heard only by loggers methodically sawing down the mighty trees. Today, on the California coast near Santa Cruz, one can still witness the passage of a steam-powered train through the Redwoods. What the loggers saw is no longer heard. During the early parts of the century, the Southern Pacific offered a train known as the Suntan Special. Now, after many years, passengers can once again take a train to the famous Santa Cruz Boardwalk. The amazing thing about both of these trains, beside the fact that either one exists, is that they both run to the same place, somewhere that one can step back in time, somewhere like Roaring Camp. Roaring Camp, located in Felton, California, is a recreation of a Western logging community. Here, people can leave behind hectic everyday life and spend a few hours at a slower pace. Early in the morning, people begin to gather, ready to leave behind their cares and travel back in time. The showcase for Roaring Camp, in fact its initial reason for existence, has always been the narrow gauge train to the top of Bear Mountain, the Roaring Camp and Big Tree's narrow gauge railroad. Departing Roaring Camp, there is always excitement in the air as the engineer pulls out the throttle of the steam locomotive and begins the steep, curving climb to the summit of Bear Mountain. As soon as the train leaves Roaring Camp, it enters the famous Big Tree stand of Redwoods. This pristine grove of towering trees is what many people come to see. The beautiful setting quickly captures the attention of all the passengers.
Well, the scenic experience is really quite something to behold. This area was turned over, was actually purchased by a man around 1867, I believe, a man named Joseph Welch, who came up here with an attorney for the Isaac Graham family. Isaac Graham was a mountain man that owned all this property. He died 4 years previous to that, and they were going to subdivide this. Joseph Welch was along for the ride with his friend and was taken by the beauty of these trees, and he himself said, I will buy these trees, don't sell them to be logged off. And interestingly enough, back then it was, in 1867, it was 350 acres of virgin redwoods for $6,000.
$6,000 does indeed sound like a bargain price when one considers that this majestic forest would certainly have been destroyed by loggers had Joseph Welch not bought the land himself. This purchase was made long before anyone even dreamed of saving natural resources for future generations. Today, patrons of Roaring Camp can thank Mr. Welch for his foresight and enjoy the splendor of God's creation. ride on the Roaring Camp in Big Trees is more than just the Redwood experience. It is also a chance to ride behind a steam locomotive. The railroad employs several examples of a now rare type of engine, the narrow-gauge geared logging locomotive. Engine number 7 is a member of a family of locomotives that most people don't know anything about, a class of locomotives called the shays.
Shay locomotives were strong, dependable locomotives used to pull the logs out of the forest, to take them to the mill, not necessarily to take the finished lumber to market, but to get the logs, or in other cases, the minerals out of the mines or the forests. Geared locomotives, the shays, the Heislers, the Climax locomotives, which we have here at Roaring Camp, are slow locomotives. They don't move very fast. They're extremely powerful and they're extremely flexible, but they don't move very fast. They're built for rough track, out in the woods, sharp curves, steep, heavy grades. They're basically built to replace an ox. An ox doesn't move very fast, and neither does a shay.
Even though shays are authentic, historic steam locomotives, they don't always get the respect from the public that a museum piece deserves.
The public in general, even the old-timers, very seldom have they ever seen a shay locomotive. A shay is very unusual for them. There were about 2,700 of these locomotives built, yet most people have never seen them. That's because they were up in the forest where no one would really go, or they'd have to really go hunting for the locomotives.
When most people think of a steam locomotive, a machine such as Norfolk and Western's famous 611 comes to mind. Known as rod engines, these locomotives were designed to haul trains at mainline speeds on track with little curvature on small grades. The shay locomotive, on the other hand, was at home in the logging environment, with its steep grades and sharp curves on track that was often temporary. Shays have been known to operate quite well on track that has been laid down the middle of a stream. The reason that a shay is able to function so well in this harsh environment is because it was designed completely different from a rod locomotive. In a shay, steam is fed from the boiler to 3 vertical cylinders, which transfer the power to a crankshaft, much as in an automobile. The crankshaft then powers gears, which in turn spin the wheels. This makes for an extremely powerful locomotive because all wheels are powered even on curves. It takes 2 people in the cab of the steam locomotive to keep all of this machinery running. Since a steam locomotive is powered by boiling massive quantities of water, it is the job of the fireman to keep the boiler full of water and a hot fire going on at all times. Now, most people think that the fireman is always having to shovel coal into the firebox. The notion that all steam locomotives burn coal is in fact a misnomer. Many steam engines on the West Coast burned oil because coal was unavailable. Logging locomotives burned oil to prevent the machine from belching hot coal cinders into a dry forest. While the fireman is busy keeping up steam pressure, the engineer is charged with the running of the locomotive. Keeping the engine in motion on a steep grade with a heavy train demands great skill. Charging up grade, the crew has their work cut out for them as the train encounters one of the most unique engineering feats in railroading, the switchback. Designed to give the railroad maximum elevation in as little space as possible, the switchback forces the train to stop and back up the hill. Once the top of the switchback is reached, the train once again reverses itself and continues forward up the grade to the top of Bear Mountain.
About 70 miles away, that's the south end of the Coast Redwood Forest. Or you can go north of us all the way up to Curry County, Oregon, and that's the north end of the Coast Redwood Forest because it's exactly as described. It's a redwood forest that's dependent on marine-type conditions for its very survival.
Near the summit of Bear Mountain, the train pauses at Cathedral Grove to allow the passengers to view the splendor of this peaceful spot and learn about the majestic redwoods.
It was back in 1847 when Austrian botanists decided that the redwood, this the only known type at the time, was not a member of any other tree species. So they chose Sequoia's name as the proper title for the redwood family. Now sempervirens, and that's the other half of the name, that's Latin for always living. And that's a good description of the root systems down at the bottom of these trees.
All too soon, the trip up Bear Mountain ends as the train passes by the sawmill and returns to Roaring Camp. Back at Roaring Camp, a Western cookout lunch awaits the hungry passengers. Many times during the year, there is lively noontime entertainment for the whole family to enjoy. The entertainment and nostalgia offered at Roaring Camp draws thousands of people every year. Most patrons aren't aware of how all of this came into being. Roaring Camp was not built by a logging company, railroad, or some other large corporation. Rather, it was the lifelong dream of F. Norman Clark. In 1985, the California Travel Industry Association presented him with its Entrepreneur of the Year award and produced a video presentation about him.
F. Norman Clark believed in the American pioneer's spirit, and he lived it. Born in Los Angeles on June the 25th, 1935, Norm's family has been in railroading for 5 generations, and his passion for preserving railroad equipment began at an early age. His youthful summers were spent commuting by rail to the Los Angeles County Library, where he researched Western railroads and formed dreams of restoring a steam logging railroad of the 1880s. At 14 years old, when other boys were building model railroads, Norm corresponded with railroad presidents and saved historical railroad cars and engines from the scrap heap, and helped establish Los Angeles' famed Griffith Park travel town. In 1953, he founded the Southern California chapter of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, and at 20 years old, was named president of the National Railroad Museum. After successful years in the insurance industry and as a young railroad executive, Norman Clark decided to live his dream. In 1958, at 23 years old, he convinced a group of investors to acquire a lease on 179 acres of virgin redwood forest in Felton, California, and help him finance the development of a tourist railroad, which would recreate a steam logging railroad of the 1880s. He would call it the Roaring Camp and Big Trees Narrow Gauge Railroad. Upon arrival at Roaring Camp, young Norm Clark had just $25 in his pocket. Then, from the forest and the rusted iron, he carved and welded his dream. Five years later, Roaring Camp's first scheduled passenger train climbed the grade toward Bear Mountain and, by day's end, carried 44 revenue passengers.
Roaring Camp went on to become one of the premier attractions in Northern California. In 1985, Norman Clark realized another dream with the purchase of the Southern Pacific Line to Santa Cruz. Unfortunately, this man of vision never got to see full service restored to these tracks, as F. Norman Clark died in December of 1985. Although Mr. Clark passed away, his dream did not, and the railroad line to Santa Cruz, now known as the Santa Cruz Big Trees and Pacific, offers Roaring Camp patrons a new and exciting ride.
The big trees out here on the coast of California are properly called Sequoia sempervirens, which means the ever-living coastal redwood tree, one of two types of redwood we have here in California. You can identify these giant trees by their bark, which has got grooves in it. It's kind of fuzzy. The big tree off to the right of our locomotive there, 1,300 years old. Look at the burn marks on that tree from the fires that used to come through almost every year, about 150 years ago. In 1891, Benjamin Harrison, who was President of the United States, rolled through here on a narrow gauge train and enjoyed the scenery. And in 1901, William McKinley stopped in this grove here. But the most famous president of all to come through here came through in 1903. It was in 1903 that the teddy bear himself, Teddy Roosevelt, rolled through here on his narrow gauge train and asked for the train to be stopped right here in the road. And he walked down off the train and into the redwood trees. And next thing you know, there was a panic in the Secret Service because they had lost track of the President of the United States. Well, it just turns out that the President had walked inside a nice big hollow redwood tree and sat down to take a little nap. Now, the bridge that we'll be crossing on here in just a moment says 1909 up on the river, and that was when it was placed here as one of the last phases of standard gauge on this railroad line after the 1906 earthquake that wrecked San Francisco. This bridge was placed here, replacing a long wooden trestle that spanned the river here prior to 1909. But notice the forest around here looks much different. scientists. That's because the lumberjacks cut every single redwood tree down on this side of the river, clear-cut the entire area 90 years ago. And if you look, you can see the stumps of the original redwoods off to the left with brand new trunks growing right up around them. And those trunks are coming out of the original root systems of the earlier trees that were cut down.
This was originally Mr. Clark's goal, was to get a hold of this line, and after the floods of '82, the terrible storms, we finally got this line, and it's well over 100 years old. It was considered probably the most scenic route that Southern Pacific ever took, along the South Pacific Coast, the railroad that preceded it, the same thing. It's along a river canyon, and you're looking down into that river aspect, crossing steel bridges built in 1909, and big cement arches built into the side of a mountain that initially was blasted out by Chinese railroad workers, some of them that had been on the Transcontinental Railroad. There's just an awful couple of neat wood-lined tunnels that you see, one with a curve in it and one that's close to 1,000 feet long.
The beautiful forest that attracts passengers today is in fact the reason rails were built here in the first place. In 1874, construction was begun on the Santa Cruz and Felton Railroad, which was built to haul timber out of the area. This narrow gauge line was eventually extended from Santa Cruz to San Francisco. In 1877, it was sold to the Southern Pacific in standard gauge by 1909.
I started in 1946 with Southern Pacific and retired 40 years later. Oh, I used to fire the suntans up here when they used to have the old suntans and specials. I really liked that. See all those nuts climbing all over the engines. Rail fans, that is. And I fired a lot of helpers when we had two trains, one train up here to the sand plant and a train up to Davenport. We always had the steam helpers on those. And that was interesting. I really enjoyed that. And then it gets pretty hot around here too on the steam engine. Our train right now is really relaxing. I like it. This is my third season back with Roaring Camp, and I really enjoy my job.
Who could not enjoy getting paid to glide through scenery such as this? Once the train reaches Santa Cruz, it leaves the forest environment behind and presents an entirely new picture to the passengers.
You come in through the sort of the back door of Santa Cruz, which is kind of neat. Our sixth tunnel goes underneath the site of the Santa Cruz Mission. As soon as the train leaves tunnel number 6, it offers another treat for the passengers by running right down the middle of the street. Arrival in Santa Cruz is one of the most unique experiences in all of Roaring Camp, as the train backs into town by going right past the beach and onto the boardwalk.
swim in the Pacific is but one of the pleasures that awaits passengers at Santa Cruz. Patrons can return to Roaring Camp on the same train, or as many people do, they can return on a later train and enjoy the beach and boardwalk. From the Redwoods to the boardwalk, the railroads at Roaring Camp offer people something special, a chance to get away from it all, an opportunity to live a little history and enjoy one of America's great natural wonders.